Tonight, the book Town and Country is got the equivalent of the Michelin star review via Kirkus. They're the who's who of, if you get a star from Kirkus, you're pretty much set for life. So congratulations. You got a 20-book deal coming.
Yeah, it's all easy now. Yeah.
However, Kirkus has called Town and Country a thoroughly engaging, intelligent debut, brimming with insight and a sense of place. So congratulations to tonight's author, Brian Schaefer. He contributes regularly to the New York Times, has written for New Yorker, New York Magazine, and more. He is a recipient of a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship in Arts Journalism, in which he was a finalist for the Livingston Award for International Reporting. Please welcome Mr. Schaefer. And joining Brian, many of you know the gentleman to my right. I've been a great admirer of his work. He's not only, for a quarter of a century, was Professor Emeritus of Writing at UCSB, but what he's done for the local community, film community, cinematic community, has been understated and underappreciated. So I just want to thank Mashey for, as the director of the Santa Barbara Jewish Film Festival, from 1995 to 2015, the outrageous Santa Barbara Lesbian and Gay Film Festival, as well as currently programming with the Santa Barbara International Film Festival. These are just the highlights because we don't have enough time in this event to talk about Mashey. So thank you, Mashey, for joining us and taking it away.
And Brian's now going to interview me.
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to just have a conversation. Michael has said a lot about what I was going to say about the book. It's a first-time novel. So talk a little bit about the involvement of this. We were talking before. Usually first-time novels are about your family and the angst that they create for you. But Brian has gone in an entirely other different direction. So how did this come about? It is based on an area of New York that you're familiar with. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, I had no angst whatsoever with my family, so there was just no material. So I had to find something else. So yes, and so my husband and I split our time between New York City and the Hudson Valley, and we had been going up there for years. We've been up there for over a dozen years now, and so I've been observing the dynamics between second homeowners and locals, and it just raised a lot of questions for me in terms of what is my responsibility here as somebody who splits time in two places, and especially when it comes to the politics, and you have the ability to register in a place that you don't live full time. And it made me wonder, am I aware of what my neighbors are experiencing, and how do I put that into my calculations politically? So those are ideas that we're percolating, wondering how our neighbors perceived us. But in terms of this actually turning into a novel, I never intended for it to be. I never would have otherwise chosen to write certainly a first novel about politics so explicitly, about a congressional race. So it all happened a little accidentally, which is that I did a master's in creative writing, so I did go to school for fiction, but then I simultaneously was working for a newspaper. When I moved to New York, I fell into journalism and had a full plate of freelance articles. But I was itching to get back to fiction, and so I decided to do National Novel Writing Month in 2019, which existed. I mean, it is unfortunately since defunct, but it had been around for 30 years, and was this really wonderful program where anybody who wanted to, regardless of your experience, skill, ambition, you could write a novel in a month. The idea was just that you committed to writing roughly 2,000 words a day. There was a wonderful online community of support and inspiration, and I thought it would be fun. I thought it would be a great way to dip back into fiction. And so at the very last minute, actually the weekend of my brother's wedding, I decided to commit to National Novel Writing Month. And so I needed like a subject and a story that would give me a cast of characters, that would give me structure, that would give me stakes, and a congressional race provided all of that. And it allowed me also to explore these questions that I'd already been thinking about our dynamics and our roles upstate. So it started in November 2019. I thought it was just going to be this messy, rough draft that I never looked at again. And then my husband read it a few months later, and he said, "You should really develop this." And I said, "Okay, great. I have like a full plate of articles. Maybe I'll spend a week or two on it in the summer." And then COVID, and then all my articles went away. And then I had, and then we were in isolation, and I had a rough draft of a story, and my husband said, "This is your chance. Turn this into a novel." And that's what I did. And so, against all my own expectations, that is how it began, and that's how 6 years later it became Town and Country.
Okay. What's interesting to me, you mentioned, you sort of emphasized the politics, but it's a novel that does so much more than just politics. Politics is one of the streams of it, and I mentioned to you, and to me, and I mean this in the highest form of flattery, is when I was reading it, I kept saying to myself, "Oh, Middlemarch. This is a lot of Middlemarch in this novel." And sure enough, a character pops up, and it's not a plot spoiler. Don't worry. Just that Middlemarch is one of the books. And I went. There was a vibe about community, about the different people that are in this community, about people learning things. So you really, it goes beyond politics to so many other areas. And in fact, I would say, and maybe you want to talk about this, the politics is downplayed. You never say Democrat and Republican. It's
Right.
counties or duffels, whatever they're called. And was that again a deliberate choice on your part?
Yeah, and from the beginning, it was the decision not to depict politics so explicitly, but to explore it as the water that we just all swim in, and the way that it impacts our relationships and our sense of ourselves, our sense of our loyalties. But I didn't want to. The reason that it, though inspired by the Hudson Valley, the town in the novel, Griffin, is fictional. It's not in any defined state, and it doesn't take place in any particular time. And that was because I wanted to free the characters from the need to respond to a particular moment, a particular issue, particular national figures. And in the same way that I was stripping it of a geographic location and a particular time, even though it is contemporary, I also wanted to remove the political labels that we put on ourselves, which it's not a sleight of hand. Like the characters are aligned exactly in the way that you think, but I felt like that there was something of not seeing them first and foremost by their party affiliation that allowed readers and even the characters themselves to see themselves as more than just that, and to look beyond the reflex that we tend to have.
I think you do that really well, because the novel has all of these a wide variety of different characters coming at everything from different points of view. The gay society is not just Johnny One Note. There's a lot of different gays, a lot of different people approaching gayness. There's Diane, who is the wife of the person running against the gay guy. I mean, she's a fascinating character. She's selling houses to the gay people, but her husband is running against them. So you have this interesting, your characters are really torn by dynamics. Leon, who we talked about, who's this curmudgeonly gay guy who doesn't fit in. And I really liked him because, we have all this, gays are all friendly with each other and they all get along well. And you have this poor guy who just does not and cannot fit in. So, and then you have Dalton, who's just on the verge of coming out. You've got Will, but you've got a wide variety. Was it hard to keep them all in your head?
Yes, and I think it's hard for readers to keep in their heads initially, but I think, the way that I think of it is that, it's like you enter any town, the way that you enter any social space is that you're confused by everybody. You can't remember somebody's name or who they belong to, especially with gay guys. It all blurs. But the more you spend time in a place, the more you spend time in a community, the more you get to know people. and suddenly you find yourselves, you do realize that, oh yeah, this person is, you know, married to this person, and this is what they do. And so the way that you start to feel a part of the community, I think, is mimicked in the book and how the book progresses. And it was something that I wanted to kind of evoke in the reader. And so that sense of initial confusion, and then you feel, oh, I belong here. I'm part of this. I know these people. So yeah, so that was very much intentional. And I look, especially for a debut novel, again, this kind of came from the whole accidental nature of how this piece came about. I do not recommend 6 point of view characters when you're trying to sell your first book, but it is the thing that emerged because I wanted to tell the story from a lot of different points of view, because I wanted to show the complexity of particularly the gay community, which is often depicted as, you know, kind of a uniform bubble. But I was interested in the generational dynamics, in the socioeconomic dynamics, and in the way that that people are excluded, that there is an exclusivity to it, and people who desperately want to be part of it, even if they're critical of it, as Leon is, that they, when they are kept out, what that feels like and what that does. And I think in a lot of ways it allowed Leon to emerge as maybe the most allegorical character, and you know what happens kind of writ large in a society when somebody is feels condescended to, feels dismissed, what they do with that sense of hurt, and how they might turn around and hurt others in return.
Yeah, I think that's one of it. You said is an allegorical kind of character. As I said, for me, he's not a central character, but he's a character that has some, you know, there's a place for him in this, and I haven't seen that many, you know, characters like that. Also, you're not always kind to the gay community. This isn't, you know, a rah-rah, you know, Edmund White kind of glorification. This is showing people in all their colors. Again, did you think that was taking a chance that your gay community might say, you know, you could be a little more positive about us, that, you know, we're nicer than this, or we're kinder than that?
Yeah, I think my hope was to show both sides, in the sense of, I think the two sides that we all have, which is that, you know, in one sense we are driven by our friendships and our camaraderie, and I think for this gay community that is certainly an important part to their relationship, and I wanted to show the beauty of that, and it is a really important part of our community upstate as well. At the same time, the project was in part an exercise in self-analysis and self-criticism, in terms of, well, we are arriving from the city, and we are impacting the direction and the evolution of, you know, in the Hudson Valley, but also in this town of Griffin, and how might we be perceived, and are we, and to what degree do we keep ourselves isolated from the community, and how are we, kind of willfully or not, remaining oblivious to some of the really serious issues that our neighbors might be facing. And so that doesn't, so that is, yes, a type of criticism. It doesn't mean that these people are, that these characters are bad, and you see that many of them actually kind of do break through that bubble, and they do start to see the complexity around them, and they do make connections with the local, you know, with their neighbors. But some of them don't, and I see that, you know, not just in gay communities, but everywhere. There are people who choose to see what is happening around them, to choose to look at the complexity and the challenges that their neighbors might be facing, and there are others who are happy to remain in their bubble and to kind of keep their, you know, keep their head down. And you know, I love reading gay literature, and I saw this as, in conversation with many of the books, the community books like Dancer from the Dance and Faggots and, you know, Back to Isherwood, and a lot of those books which take place within, which is a gay community examining itself, criticizing itself, and I wanted to put that into, you know, into a modern day where, especially in politics, in a lot of those previous books, the gay community does not have political power, and now for a certain segment, there is. And I wanted to see what we do with that, and also to put that in conversation with non-gay characters to understand what that relationship is doing and how that affects the way that that this community sees itself.
I think, you know, it's every character in the book seems to be examining themselves and taken out of their comfort zone. And Diane, especially, I know I asked her to read a section on Diane because she's a character who's really torn by her husband, her own evangelical beliefs, and then the gay people who are actually giving her the money to survive. So she's another character who goes through, Will also goes through. All the characters are really examining. I don't want to make the novel seem like a heavy-duty Dostoevsky examination of society. It's actually a lot of fun to read, and it zips along at a very good pace. But do you want to read a section from the novel just so people get a sense of the style and the feel of it?
Yeah, so we'll get introduced to Diane, who is the wife of one of the congressional candidates, and as Mashey said, she's a devout Christian. She's also a real estate agent who has found that a lot of her success is from selling second homes to, much to her surprise, this growing group of gay second homeowners. And so there's a degree in which that gives her a sense of personal pride, but also challenges her beliefs. Her son Will has recently come out, and she is struggling with that. But it is not a story of rejection. This is a family that does love each other and that tries to stay in relationship. And so there's a lot going on in her life.
Has another son
who's
got baggage.
Yeah, who's dealing with some recently lost his best friend to a drug overdose. But when we meet her right now, she is showing homes to some prospective buyers. On a sunny Sunday morning after the parade, Diane Riley's heels sink into damp grass. Why does she insist on wearing such shoes, given the requirements of her job to traverse lawns, meadows, and fields? Because, she answers herself with proud impatience, the kinds of houses she now sells require her to project refinement. Her city clients, like these two eager men following her across the front yard of a splendid 18th century farmhouse, expect polish. Her former attire of sneakers, boots, and fleece zip-ups just won't do. It's also why she had purchased this silk blouse, on clearance at all for less, but never mind, and splurged on the blonde streaks that brighten her short, tawny hair. For local clients, the fleece and boots return. She can't appear too fussy. It's all projection, she knows. No one has ever commented on or even seemed to register her appearance. But it's about how she presents herself, about embodying confidence and believing her locally grown tastes are credible to this burgeoning category of clientele who seek not to swap their urban life, but to supplement it. The Duffels, they're called, by her friends and neighbors, by cashiers and mechanics, by her chatty hairdresser and the cheerful but caustic women at the DMV. She can't recall when or where she first heard the term, perhaps whispered at church or dismissively dropped in a social media post, or angrily slung about in the comment section of the Griffin Gazette articles about rising rental costs and another new microbrewery. In any case, about 5 years ago, the phrase seemed to surface in half her conversations. After some confusion, she learned that the nicknamesake referred to the small satchels carried by weekenders as they disembark from trains and cars, the only bag necessary since, whether they're antiquing or apple picking, staying at a hotel or in a second home, attending outdoor performances or extravagant rustic nuptials, they won't be sticking around past Monday. When their numbers began to swell, many locals spoke of the Duffels with both mild irritation and grave concern, unsure whether these stylish aliens had landed with benign or malicious intent. Diane, who considered herself a staunch champion of her hometown, initially shared in the collective disdain and was among the more vocal of the Duffels' early detractors. But by this point, she was also selling homes. And quite unexpectedly, Duffels began calling with interest in her most expensive listings, regularly paying over asking, offering cash. Diane started to wonder what good it did to resist their arrival. If they were coming anyway, why not benefit from welcoming them? Her evolution on the matter illustrated by new ads placed in identifiably Duffel territory on Granger Street, earned her a few awkward encounters at church and a slew of nasty remarks online. Her entrepreneurial pivot was ungenerously interpreted, even by close friends, as crass capitalizing on Griffin's newfound popularity. But they misunderstood her. She is still a staunch champion of Griffin, just now as its promoter rather than its guard. Perhaps she is ambitious, yes, but she is ambitious on behalf of her town, wanting for it the same prosperity she wants for her family. Her ambition, like Griffin's, like most ambition, was born from desperation and a feeling of being undervalued. When the Rileys were struggling, her return to work kept them afloat. She worked so Will could go to college. She worked to keep Joe stable. She worked so Chip could serve this community as essentially a glorified volunteer. She works with the Duffels to prove that success can be homegrown in Griffin. And because if she doesn't, enterprising Duffels will cater to their own. So now, out of a genuine, if convenient shift in perspective, she has come to consider the Duffels largely harmless, like the field mice, wolf spiders, milk snakes, and brown marmorated stink bugs that infest the area. More annoyance than danger, a self-isolating species. And, as evidenced by these two eager men behind her, a lucrative wealth spring of prospective buyers.
There we get, as I mentioned before, the whole dynamic in the character as she struggles back and forth with trying to justify her job, trying to justify her position in society. And you do that with all the characters, with Will, who's trying to come to terms with himself. Who are also, like you mentioned, Isherwood and Forster. Did you have actual models that you were thinking consciously of when you were writing?
Emerson Maupin, of course. There's, the multiple perspectives and the interweaving. That was an influence.
Let me just interrupt you there for a second, because one of the things, you mentioned this in passing, but I think it's important to mention. Again, for a first-time novelist, the tendency would be to take one character and follow, like a Bildungsroman, follow that character all the way through. But you don't do that, and each chapter is a different character. And that's very, in a way, dangerous for a first-time writer, and yet it gives us, again, this perspective. Again, was that something you felt evolved as you went along?
Yeah, I think from the beginning, I was interested in looking at it from multiple angles, and specifically not only from within the gay community and the gay characters. And so Diane really emerged as somebody who I think helped me find my way from beyond just that click. And I was interested in Will's experience because, of course, the coming of age is such a classic trope, and particularly in gay novels. But I was also really interested in exploring the multi-generational aspect of the gay community. So Stan, who is the husband of the other congressional candidate, is also a really key figure. He lost a loved one to AIDS, and the experience of that is a real driver. It's a real motivator for why he's investing so much in this race and in having a degree of political power, which he had never had before, and comes from a moment where he and his community was so politically powerless. And so I found quite a poignancy in that being his reason for being so committed and invested in this race. And it felt like a really interesting counterpoint to Will's experience, who's coming in so wide-eyed. And it was also something that I wanted to depict because I think it's such a beautiful and interesting component of gay communities, the fact that a friendship circle can span so many generations. And in our friendship, we have very close friends in 4 decades, spanning 30s to 60s, and it's a really unique thing, and it's a beautiful thing. And in this group, I wanted to show the ways that also means there are very different experiences of what it means to be gay, what that means in a political context, and so that range allowed me to look at it from those layers.
And you also have that in the society, because the way you set up Leon with Jerry, who's a straight person in the town, and you have a lot of that also in the town. The dynamics between those people, there's the people at the bar, and there's the other people doing dynamics between them, rich and poor, and so you have that. It's interesting, but it's actually much more complicated than when you think about it, what you did in that novel, to have all these different dynamics running around and keeping it all moving forward to the election. So that's kind of an exciting aspect of that. Let me open this up to questions from hello. Politics.
Well, I'm interested, obviously, in the congressional race. How did you present that?
So it was actually inspired by a congressional race in our district in 2014, which put a lot of these dynamics in stark contrast. And so it was actually a race that led me to start asking the questions that I did. In the book, I span the 6 months leading up to the congressional race. And so it does track the way that the campaigns unfold, although at an early stage, I decided that neither of the candidates were going to be point of view characters, because ultimately it wasn't about the mechanics of the race or how the campaigns, like their experience within the race wasn't the thing that I was interested in. It was more about how the race really challenged the relationships and the loyalties of the people in their families and in their social circles. And so it really became, I think, more of a tool to ask those questions and to, I think, to allow for a lot of unexpected encounters, because I think the stakes are so high, and because of the various events along the way, these groups who otherwise wouldn't interact kept finding themselves in the same place and in opposition to each other. And so there was a lot of rich drama that also challenged people's sense of themselves and how they saw themselves in relationship to their perceived communities and their broader community.
Thank you.
So I am excited to read this, but not having read it, but hearing you talk about it, I'm wondering if your interest in the multiple perspectives also comes from your journalism background, or felt like a place where you were comfortable working. And that may or may not be true. So then I'd like to hear how you thought about or think about the differences between writing journalism and writing fiction.
Thank you. I think yes. I think that was a huge reason why I approached it the way that I did, because every article that I've written requires me to reach out to multiple people to bring in multiple perspectives, and so you're always looking for the people that you interview to help you discover the story, and you're looking to put their quotes, put their perspective into conversation with each other, which is essentially what an article is. And so I think I took that experience and took that template and applied it. And I think also it affected the way that I approached the kind of reporting of the book, which I did. For every article that I do, it's about showing up. Whether I'm writing about a performance, you go to rehearsal. If I'm writing about a community, you spend time in the community. And so for this, there was a lot I needed to learn, a lot that was outside of my personal experience. I grew up in a Jewish home in Southern California, so to understand the experience of a devout Christian woman in a small town, I had to watch church sermons and experience what her community would feel like. I don't have experience with anybody in my life with drug abuse, so I attended support groups. I went to opioid response training. I sat at bars all over the region, chatted up bartenders, overheard conversations. I had a dairy farmer friend bring me on a cow milking. And so this is how I gathered all the visceral material that infused the book.
And also, I think it's important to mention, there's no judgment. This is not a judgmental book. So Diane comes across as cleanly and honestly as Will, who's at the other end of the spectrum. And that's a really lovely thing that you did. You never felt, I'm putting down that community, or these are ignorant people who don't get into the big city, and they were just, it wasn't that kind of approach. So I like what you said about reporting, and that's a great point. It had that sort of impartiality that we want from reporting, and I didn't think about it. I didn't realize that you went to a farm and learned how to milk a cow. That's a little excessive.
But it actually changed that section. I'd written that section before doing, and there's so much material online, so
Right.
You can do a lot of that research. But there was something about showing up on the farm where the smell of the hay and the order with which things happened, and the fact that I saw the names of all the cows kind of nicely printed on their stalls. It was a detail that I was able to bring in.
Yeah, it's so funny. You take it for granted and not realizing this actually was a result of a lot of work and research. You were going to ask a question.
Brian, you used an expression before that intrigued me, and it may be unfair to ask you to expand on it out of context. I don't remember the context in which you used it. You said, I belong here. I belong here. And I'm just wondering what you mean by I belong here.
When did
I
it
don't remember. Maybe it was about people who are coming in from out of town, and they come to Griffin, and do they belong there or something like that?
Yeah, was it from the reading, or did I said it? I made a comment about
that people are looking for where they can belong, and then they can say, yes, I belong to this group or whatever it is.
I belong.
Yeah. I mean, I think in a sense it is a driving like emotional impulse for all the characters. I mean, I think they are looking for whether that be like a friendship or a familial relationship or a romantic relationship. I think it's
I think it was in the context of Leon.
Of Leon.
The character Leon.
Yeah.
Right, he did not belong.
Because he did not
Correct.
feel
No, but
He didn't
was
feel that he did.
yeah, and was desperately looking for a place to belong, and really struggling and coming against the exclusivity of a social circle, which we like to imagine is kind of open and welcoming, but in fact can be quite exclusive. And whether it's a family unit or a group of friends, that there is, that people are left out. And so I was interested in looking at where people want to belong, where they're not allowed to belong, where they do find, sometimes unexpectedly, the place where they belong.
It's a very optimistic book in that sense. That there is, I wouldn't say a resolution isn't happy ever after, but there is that searching and then that sort of constant, where do I belong, and then finding a community or whatever. And people learning. I mean, it's a great book in terms of learning. Would you call this a moral book? We talked about that before.
I think, I don't know if I would call the book moral in itself, just because I don't think it is necessarily proposing, a certain morality, but I think the hope is that in the experience of each of the characters, and in in these small steps that they take towards their own growth, towards staying in relationship with each other, that I hope that it maybe prompts questions of morality in a reader. Although I think it does offer something to take away in terms of how we might see like the efforts that we can make in our own lives. We were talking about Forrester and how E.M. Forrester and Howard's End has a little shout out in the book, and I was thinking a lot as I was writing it about the famous kind of motto of that book, Only Connect, which is something that I think really informed my thinking, and was a kind of a North Pole for how all of these characters are searching and what they're moving towards.
Yeah, Only Connect is really, now that you mention it, really could be almost a epigram for this kind of novel. Yes.
So, Brian, I'm interested in the process of writing, and I'm just starting in my retirement to play with fiction a little bit. So, how did you approach at the beginning characters? Did you like have separate, pages in your computer or on hard paper where you brainstormed about this one and what the qualities that person had, the conflicts? How did you do that? And how did you sort of map a plot where they would intersect?
I wish I had done that. I think it would have saved me many drafts and many months. I think because I spit it out all at once as part of National Novel Writing Month, I had to do a lot of reverse engineering in terms of, now that I have this raw material, what is the story that I want to tell? Are the characters that I invented on the fly, are these actually the people that are gonna continue on? Diane, I do not think played a major role in that first draft, but as I started to develop the story, she just interested me. And so I wanted to spend time with her. I wanted to see her in different circumstances. I wanted to see her showing a house. I wanted to see her at church and interacting with that community. And so I think and same thing with Leon, the characters that I felt most drawn to, I would kind of write them, I would give them more scenes, I would see where it would take them, and it was really draft after draft that I would identify connections and identify where two characters might have a commonality. As you mentioned, there's a lot of there's a lot of like parallels and echoes in the book, historically and also between characters. And that was something that was not plotted, but I think was something that I would just recognize in a draft. And then I would go back and enhance it and maybe dial up that connection. And it really was, I would say, this book came about from revision. And it was just, my parents read many early drafts. I had a whole group of friends who read many early drafts. And then in terms of the publishing process, it took a long time. It took me 2 years to get an agent. And so there was a lot of rejection during that process. And with it, there was some great feedback that gave me more insights that allowed for another draft. And then even when I had a great agent that I was super excited about, and I thought, okay, this is it. It took us a year to sell it. The first round of submissions was not successful. But from that, I got more insight and more understanding about the storytelling and the characters and what I needed to do to make it clearer, to make it stronger. And so I went back, and at each stage, I thought, this is the book. It cannot be any different. And then at each stage, somebody showed me how it could be different. And then when I took a deep breath and was ready to re-enter it, it always came out better and more layered. And I think those layers, I don't think you can pre-plan them. I think they really can't come from, like the baking period. Like, it has to sit in the oven for that long in order for all the flavors to meld together. And so it really, in a sense, needed to be the 6 years that it was. I hope the next one is not 6 years. but this one needed that time.
Yes.
So, this is a question I always would like to ask every current journalist. In your journalist years of craft, have you always wanted to write a book?
It's interesting because my journalism and my fiction were like, I learned them side by side. So I went to grad school for fiction while I was working for a newspaper. So yes, I think I always had an ambition to write a novel at some point, but they weren't. It didn't happen one after the other. It was kind of, actually, it could have gone either way. I could have gone into fiction and tried to write a novel straight out of grad school, but it was the journalism that kind of more quickly picked up steam and gave me more opportunities. but it was the combination of learning those skills that I think led to the combined style of this book. And to your question about how the journalism informed it, in grad school during the day, I would learn to write these beautiful sentences and think about character and use active verbs. And then I would go to the newsroom and we would just like slash all the articles and, you know, my editor would just be like, get to the point, streamline this, you know, just like tell people what it's about. And so I think it's that really efficient mode of journalistic writing, and also the observational fiction that that is kind of how I learned how to write, or how I developed my style, was by fusing the two.
One more question. Lauren?
I have a question. I loved the characters as I got to know them, and kind of still really feel like they're people in my community. So I think you really brought them to life, and I thank you, because there were characters in the book that I have not met in my life experience. So that was a big opening for me, and I really appreciated it. What I learned today, and you're talking, Mashey, to Brian, and your questions to him, is that how really hard this was as a project for a first novel with so many characters in it. So my question is, as an artist who remembers my first work of art where I wanted everything in that one piece, and then I was like, oh, I don't have to say everything in one piece. I have a lifetime ahead of me, and I can get an idea in each piece that I do along the way. So I'm curious now, kind of what your thinking is for the way you will approach future, both your current project and your future projects. Maybe you don't have to have so many characters the next time, and kind of what is your excitement about how you will journey from here forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the next project that I'm developing now already has far fewer point of view characters. Although I did really enjoy the opportunity to move inside of people's heads, but I am also interested in kind of living with one or two people and going much deeper. I think I'm interested in longer periods of time. The excitement of writing within 6 months gives it a certain momentum, but I also love the idea of zooming out to span decades. I'm also interested in, because I so intentionally strip this of any associations, as we've talked about, political references, geographic references. I'm interested in working more with specificity, where we do actually know the year that we're in, the place that we're in, what is happening in the world at that moment, and how characters are responding to it. So I think, yeah, in a lot of ways, this is going to be a thing. Town and Country will be the book that that emerged because of the unique circumstances that it emerged in, and I'm really proud and excited that that it is my first novel. And for the subsequent ones, I think it's going to be something that I respond to in ways that that move in opposite directions and try different perspectives and try different structures. And so I think it just I'm seeing it as a kind of a springboard that, okay, now I've done this, and what else can I do?
So no sequel. I asked him, was there a sequel? It's going to be entirely different.
Something
Brian,
new.
thank you so much for a
Thank you.
fascinating